Hello and welcome to our special broadcast reaching you live from the amphitheater of the Channels Television's global headquarters here in Lagos, Nigeria. To our viewers all around the world, we say Happy Democracy Day as we commemorate the day, June the 12th. For those who may not remember, Nigeria's President Muhammadu Buhari signed into law the bill shifting today's celebrations from May 29th to June the 12th. Today is therefore symbolic to many people for different reasons. And over the next just about 3 hours or so, we will attempt to spotlight some of the key issues why today remains a key date on the nation's social and political calendar. You're most welcome. I'm Ladi Akeredoluwale.
And I'm Ijoma Unyato. It's been 21 years of uninterrupted democracy since the handover to a civilian administration led by President Olusegun Obasanjo, and that was in 1999. What today was celebrated with all the trappings of public office, not quite so much today because of the pandemic. So much has changed in our character, our politics, our economy, the judiciary, and even our social fabric. But many of those things that seem so critical to our existence have been overshadowed by a global health crisis that's gripped the entire world. But here in Nigeria, we still need to take a look at our journey, and the president did that a bit earlier today, Ladi, right?
Indeed, he did. Very early in the morning, President Muhammadu Buhari addressed the nation on first the Democracy Day, what he felt were the achievements, the fact that Nigeria had 21 years of uninterrupted democracy. Amongst others, he also took the opportunity to reel out some of the achievements of his administration, which is just over 5 years old today. Let's listen to some of what the president had to say.
The year 2020 has been like none other. In January 2020, the COVID-19 was declared a global pandemic by the World Health Organization. The number of global infections have risen from less than 8,000 shared between China and 18 other countries to over 7 million spread over 216 countries and on all continents. Nigeria recorded its first case of COVID-19 on February 27, 2020, and within the first 100 days, I have had cause to address the nation on 3 occasions within 1 month, which underscores the gravity of this pandemic. There is no doubt that this pandemic has affected the global economy and all known socio-economic systems. It has also brought grief and pain to families that have lost their loved ones. Like many Nigerians, I feel the grief and pain not only as your president, but also as someone who has lost a close member of my staff and some relatives and friends. In order to have a robust national response, I approved a presidential task force on COVID-19 to provide guidance and leadership in tackling the pandemic nationwide. State governments also constituted their own COVID-19 task forces. Complementing this was the establishment of a National Emergency Operations Center responsible for providing technical and professional guidance in the national response. The overall objective of the PTF COVID-19 is to ensure that the pandemic does not overwhelm our health systems while ensuring that we maintain an effective case management system to help in containing the spread of the virus.
The president there highlighting some of the issues. But one area that has taken critical center stage, Ijoma, is the COVID-19 pandemic. And it has brought the health sector into limelight. Whether that was desirable or it wasn't, it's an entirely different thing.
And even now, it's a bit of the celebrations and all are overshadowed with the figures now a bit above 14,000. The president there also talking about Nigerian scientists tasking them to find the COVID-19 cure. Ladi.
We're being joined now from our Abuja studios by one of those who has been guiding the response to this COVID-19 pandemic. That's the Minister for Health, Dr. Osagie Ehanire. Many people now know you. Thank you so much, Honorable Minister, for joining us this evening on the program. Let's begin by asking, where exactly are we with COVID-19 at the moment?
Well, where we are is at the moment of trying to control of the outbreak. You know that it has spread to virtually all countries in the world now, and all countries are grappling with it. There are some countries that thought that they had reached the peak, and then they are having what is called a second wave. We are still increasing. We are gradually still getting more and more cases, 14,000 positive, just over 14,000 positive by today, 387 fatalities. Where we're going is not clear, but we respond very closely by observing the trend, not only internationally, but in our country, and taking measures to be able to make sure that our health system does not collapse under the weight. Meanwhile, we have done very well. We have been able to give attention to the hotspots, to the high burden areas, to zero in on those places where we think that, where we have observed that there is a serious, the seriousness of the outbreak is particularly pregnant.
All right, Dr. Henry, one of the things people worry about is a cure. And they're asking, when is this going to happen? Where are we now in terms of the clinical trials, either orthodox or alternative? A number of people had brought in some sort of cure, which we said NAFDAC would have to validate. Where are we now?
There are trials going on all over the world. It's not only in Nigeria. All countries are rushing first to find remedy, secondly to find a vaccine. And there is not one yet that is accepted by the World Health Organization, which is a global, let us say, referee and marksman, they mark all the development going on in the world. But as far as we are concerned, we are reviewing all the options brought forward for possibilities of being remedies. Recently, we received samples from Madagascar, which we have given to our research centers. The Nigeria Institute for Pharmaceutical Research and Development, the Nigeria Institute of Medical Research in Yaba, and NAFDAC, and also the organs at the Ministry of Science and Technology looking into these herbal remedies. We have not got any results as yet. And the indigenous trials that have been tried, the indigenous herbs that have also been brought for trial, have also not yet yielded a result. As far as the other medicines are concerned, we are working with the World Health Organization Solidarity Trial to see what medicines may work. We have tried chloroquine, we are trying hydroxychloroquine, azithromycin, and some other combinations, including antiretroviral drugs, which are believed to have the potential to halt the growth or stop the growth of the virus. Some of them are said to have worked in vitro, that is to say outside of the body, but it is not yet fully confirmed that they also work inside the body in vivo. The tests are still going on. We do not have any conclusive reports as yet.
When you speak about COVID-19, Honorable Minister, what many people tend to try to highlight is the fact that now we are in a race between life and livelihoods. That is the balance that's been tried to be established. Would you say at this point in time that this is a calculated gamble, easing the lockdown when we may not have reached the peak of cases, as you've just identified for COVID-19?
Correct. That's a very good observation, in that you are trying to balance lives and livelihoods. The virus is one of the most easily spread viruses that is known to man, and it very easily will jump from one person to another due to close proximity. That's why distancing is something that we are stressing. And because of that ease of transmission, it necessitated lockdowns that are meant to limit movement of people from one place to the other, because the virus has to be carried from one town to the other, from one house to the other. And that lockdown again affects the economy. You are not able to go to farm, you are not able to go to work. So creating that balance between allowing the economy to continue and then lives not to be put at risk is it's not an easy thing. Those who have to make the decision really have to put a lot of things into consideration. The president has taken a very wise step in easing the economy so that things can go on and people can make a livelihood, and at the same time ensure that measures are in place to make sure that there is no excessive risk to lives. That is why we on our own side have continued to emphasize the non-pharmaceutical interventions that need to complement the easing of restrictions on movement. So if we are not going to move around, we must take measures that protect us and protect our neighbors and our families. The mask is the first one. The social distancing is the second one. That is something which in reality is not practicable everywhere, but people bear it in mind. And then washing your hands frequently. Again, that is not always practicable where you don't have water. Using sanitizers. Sanitizers abound now. If you have a good quality sanitizer, you are better covered than someone who has none. So these are measures which we are using to complement the risks that may be going along with reopening the economy by letting people move around.
Dr. Nhainire, while you look at the measures, and one group that are worried at the moment are healthcare workers. They've been worried for the last 21 years of democracy, etc., about their welfare. Is there any news right now that we have COVID-19 on those the hazard allowance that was to be paid to them? I know that the Minister of Labour had said that by today it will be sorted. Just in case you have any information on that, the hazard allowance for health workers?
Yes, we're worried about all Nigerians. We're particularly worried about our healthcare workers, who are the ones handling the virus, the fight against the virus. They are like the people in the engine room. We're also worried about vulnerable citizens, who are the most common potential victims, those who have underlying ailments, those who are past the age of 70, those who have previous infectious diseases like HIV, tuberculosis. But to come back to the healthcare workers, they are the ones who we pay particular attention to. We are very conscious of making sure to have necessary personal protective equipment available for them. We make sure that they work in shifts, and after the shift they all have a period by which they are assured to be virus and infection free before they go to their families. And we also have provided the social measures like life insurance and the hazard allowance. Now all those are measures which are already established and they are signed. The details are being worked out. You know that there are processes in everything. They have to be made available, they have to be allocated, you have to do the paperwork concerned around it. So I spoke with the Honourable Minister of Finance just yesterday, and she has assured me that yes, the processes are on track, and by next week they will have finished all the formalities. That is the way it goes when you are dealing with finances. But the important thing is to know that the start date is already guaranteed. So whether you get it today or next week, the date you are going to get is going to start has already been agreed upon, and the payment is assured. So health workers need not worry, need not be have any concerns that they will not be paid.
Primary healthcare centers have been brought to the fore now, because in a lot of the country, many people go to those primary healthcare centers. So in this particular situation, would you consider it important for us to focus on those primary healthcare centers, especially because as COVID-19 is ongoing, other ailments are also there to be treated?
Again, you are perfectly correct in that, that we did observe at the beginning that on the one hand, the fear of COVID-19, and on the other hand, the too much focus on COVID-19 led to the neglect to other disease patterns and the attention given to things like malaria, normal diarrhea, dysentery, even the attendance for antenatal clinic and immunization all began to drop. And healthcare workers who were not familiar with infectious diseases did not, at the initial stage, quite know how to handle patients who were suspected of having COVID-19. And some of them did not have the index of suspicion to know what this might be and how to handle this case differently. So people did get infected at the beginning, and we had that phase where we had to have a lot of health workers in isolation. Now, the stage we are in is the stage of community transmission. COVID-19 has moved from the time when it was in a disease of people who came from abroad, which it was thought to be the big man's disease. Those who had traveled abroad, they came back with the virus, and they and their friends were the ones where contact tracing was being done. And some people at the grassroots felt they were not, it was not their concern. But right now, it has spread to every nook and corner of the country. The disease is now, you can almost say, indigenized. And people who do not have a passport, who have never even been to the airport, are now contracting this imported disease. So the era of the primary healthcare center has come in. We have brought in a primary healthcare center with all their contacts at the grassroots level for tracing, tracking, and community engagement and risk communication. That is being brought in now and used very efficiently, particularly in high burden states. The head of the NPHCDA, National Primary Healthcare Development Agency, went to Lagos and Ogun just about a week ago to engage those states in how to put these assets at their disposal. We have also sent a team that is helping to put these assets at the disposal of Kano State. You know that these three states are particularly high burden states, including the FCT. So yes, you are correct. The primary healthcare network, and in fact, the boarding schools of our the boarding hostels of our secondary schools are going to come in useful in this stage for observation centers for those COVID-19 positive persons who do not have symptoms or who do not have who have only mild symptoms, to keep them at a place where they will not be at risk of infecting other citizens. So yes, the primary healthcare center is playing an important role at this stage.
Dr. Henry, as a man in the saddle of the ministry handling this pandemic, let me put it that way, how do you think this has impacted on Nigeria from your perspective, and what shape do you think the health sector will be in when this is all over, seeing as, you know, we all know the shape it was in at the beginning?
The impact of COVID-19 on the health sector is going to be global, it's going to be universal. There's not one country that is not going to suffer, have suffered from this pandemic, because the effect on every health system has been devastating. You know, many otherwise resilient health systems in countries which we respected all collapsed. You saw patients on the ground, they just could not cope, they were overwhelmed. And that is what we have been trying to avoid in Nigeria. It is come out that it's not so much how strong a health system is, but how easily overwhelmed it gets. And the lessons learned from this entire outbreak, not only in Nigeria but in other countries, is going to help to reshape the health sector. In our own case, we are going to be using the lessons learned to improve on our public health disease management. We are going to use it to manage tracing and data management. and we are also going to use it to improve the entire primary healthcare system, to create a resilient and integrated system that works with all other agencies within the Ministry of Health. Now, the effect on the tertiary sector, on the more advanced area, is going to be probably even more dramatic, in that it has become clear from this outbreak that we are actually on our own. There is almost nobody now who can fly abroad if they fall sick. We have to use our own hospitals. We have to learn how to manage our own hospitals. And in managing our hospitals, there are three things that are of importance. First is the funding. How do we fund our hospitals effectively and a fit-for-purpose way? Secondly is the administration. How do we administer hospitals in the most efficient and productive way? How do we get productivity? And thirdly, how do we use demand? How do we increase demand? How do we make people appreciate the health center? We need, our health system. We need to be able to build confidence in the health system. And in doing all of this, the private sector has to come in. The private sector will play an important role in bringing in funding and management acumen to create something that will have the confidence of the user. It will be like the patient will be like a customer, will be treated with full respect and given all the needs that they require to attend to their individual ailment.
Honorable Minister of Health, Dr. Osagie Ehanire, thank you so much for your time on this Democracy Day. And we wish you the very best of luck as you continue the battle against COVID-19 and indeed other ailments that afflict the nation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
We'll take a break. When we come back, we'll expand the discussion, still staying with the health sector. Please stay on with us.
Welcome back to the program. As we're celebrating Democracy Day, even though we're in the COVID-19 era, we've already kicked off the conversation. We started with health, obviously, as that is a key point right now. We spoke to the Honorable Minister just a few minutes ago, but we were not going to be doing all the talking. We'd like to hear from you. The hashtag is June 12. We also have hashtag Democracy Day and hashtag Democracy Day 2020. Tell us what you expect on a day like this, even though we're celebrating it this particular way right now. Could be electricity, whatever it is you have to say. If it's a question, do send us that by the Twitter or all of the hashtags that we've reeled out, Ladi.
Many hashtags, many comments, many issues to talk about. But we're staying focused on health because, of course, that has taken most of the stage, not just the center stage, but most of the stage. Joining us to take a look at some of the other issues in health. First, in our Lagos studios here, we have the president of the Pharmaceutical Society of Nigeria, Mazi Sam Onwabua. Thank you so much for being with us on this day. Sitting beside Mazi is Professor Rosemary Audu, who is the Director of Research, Nigerian Institute of Medical Research. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure.
And in our Abuja studios is Dr. Aliu Sokomba, who is the President of the Nigerian Association of Resident Doctors. Dr. Sokomba, thank you for your time. Thank you for joining us. Let's kick off the discussion. Mazi, the minister has said it, the health sector is not likely to be the same after all of this, even if we are already considering an after. Even during the course of this, it's not going to be the same. If you were to identify three things that, from your perspective, would change, should change, or need to change, what would those be?
The first thing that should change is sincerity of purpose. A proper focus, a paradigm shift. You know, you can't solve a problem except you make that problem a serious matter to you and you have a determination to solve it. If problems are treated on the political sphere and nice statements are made, we're looking at it, we're planning at it, We've been planning. We have been looking at it for years. That's the first thing that should change, okay? When government says a thing, let government decide that it knows how to get it done. So often things are said, then we start to think of how it is done. When we say a thing, let us be sure that we follow it through. I mean, the clearest example is this issue of payment of allowances. And are we waiting for the money from World Bank or from African Development Bank to pay mere allowances to healthcare professionals? And it's taking so much time and so much argument. If this can take this time, at this time when we have an emergency and money is all over the place for managing COVID, budgeted, donated, acquired, and here we can't do such simple thing. Can you imagine how much time it would take to acquire even PPE? We're talking about going to primary health care, primary health. So I like to say that this country must come to terms to decide that when it wants to do a thing, then it means to do it. That's the first. The second is that there are three things that must be done outside this issue of determination and commitment. Is that we need to rejig the health system and understand that it goes from the lowest level to the topmost level. I was glad when you brought the issue of private primary health. If our primary health care centers are well suited and well structured, resourced properly, you have properly trained staff, resourced, you get the minimum that is required, we'll get to the level where most of our ailments will be treated at the primary level, because most of them are. But today, everybody goes to the tertiary because the primary level is not cared for. So everybody ends up with headache, with typhoid, with malaria, will go to the teaching hospital. That's the system that we have. It has to change. Let the focus, I've recommended in some of my writings, that the greatest tragedy is that we are putting the most important aspects of our life to the local government. That is not resourced, not funded, not properly manned. Primary education. The people are ruined at primary level, then you wait to university to correct them. Primary health care. There is nothing on the primary health level. You go there, there is no medicine, there is no suture. If a woman wants to give delivery, she has to bring her cotton wool from home. I am telling you what is happening. I'm not here to, this is a country, we're doing a conversation as a people to decide to change our situation. So we need to focus on primary health. I had suggested, it's a constitutional thing, but I said, since the federal government seems to be the best resourced, let the federal government take care of primary health care, primary education. Let state governments take care of secondary, and let private sector take care of tertiary. Because in the tertiary, there's need for more funding, more investment. And if people get good primary health care or primary and secondary education, tertiary education can then be handled at a level that it can be funded and then some recovery made. So my next point is that we need to change that, get sure that primary health centers, primary health points, primary community pharmacies, because community pharmacies represent also primary health care. These are places that people go first. We should pay attention to that. Number two is that we need to do a proper training and motivation of our healthcare professionals, because all the equipment you have in the hospitals and in the health centers and everywhere cannot work except you have a motivated healthcare workforce. The healthcare workforce before now was disjointed, completely at war with each other, because no attempt is made to unite and bring a coherent team concept. They work as if they were in competition. We need to get the healthcare properly educated, properly resourced, rewarded, motivated, and then build a team. And that team will be on ground ready to confront any ailment, be it the usual ailments that we have, and be it infectious diseases that do occur every once in a while. And the third, is proper funding. Nigerians and leaders in the past have thought, how do we create appropriate funding for the healthcare? The budgets that the countries and the states gave were never enough. They didn't pay attention to that. They paid attention to other things, to defense and other issues. Healthcare was always poorly made. So some guys came around and said, why don't we start a health bill, a national health bill that will make a frontline first charge to healthcare. And that was a health bill that was proposed that 1% of, I think, the 1% of our revenue or budgeted should go to the healthcare. It took, from the time that it took many years to pass. After being passed, it's other 1 or 2 years ago, they started some bit of concessionary reluctant putting of money into that. We have a national health insurance that is dysfunctional. Everywhere in the world, people are living on health insurance.
Mazi, I need to put you on pause there.
Yes, I was just about to come to
yes.
Professor Audu, because he's talked about primary health care from the perspective of contact. But I know you've done a lot in terms of vaccine studies, and you've long been an advocate of the viruses don't wait for our healthcare system, Ebola, Lassa fever, and now COVID. From a research perspective, looking into how these viruses come and go, are we any closer to solving our problem? Where do we stand quickly?
Well, as it is right now, these viruses, just like you have mentioned, we have even polio that had been eradicated everywhere was a challenge here. Ebola, we're able to handle it, and here we are. It's like with this, more labs are just being set up, okay? So it's like we're not really prepared for it, okay? But we have what it takes to be prepared. I am just glad that with this particular pandemic, it's like everybody back to your country and fix it yourself. And so, for that reason now, people who probably would have just jumped out of the country to go get their health fixed have to be in here. So we really need to look inward and see how we can fix our own issues.
So our researchers at work, that's what I'm asking.
Yes, our researchers are at work. As we speak right now, in-house, we are now working on kits, test kits, okay? Test kits. We are developing, we're still working, looking for funding. Fortunately, a few people are coming out to support. So we have what it takes. We have the capacity, okay? If only we have the funds. The test kits are there, even vaccines. There are some candidate vaccines that we're still trying. There are many things we can do. At least in my institute, I do know that fortunately we had some of our staff travel abroad for training. They went to China and Institute Dakar in Senegal. And just from the 3 months, 2 months that they spent there, the knowledge they acquired is what we are using now, sequencing the virus, okay? And also even the kits, we have just this isothermal point of care. Is a PCR based, is a molecular based test, you know, which is what is recommended for COVID. And we have developed it. We're just about validating it. RNA extraction. Before now, everything we import. But since the lockdown, and we are not able to get these things, we're looking inward now. Even the sanitizers, we are developing them, we are producing them in-house. The viral transport medium, everywhere is locked. We are now producing everything. So we have everything it takes if only we invest in our own facilities in country.
Professor Audu, thank you for that. Let me go to Dr. Aliyu Sokoba. Dr. Sokoba, I don't know if you listened when the minister talked about the issue of frontline workers and the fact that the issues having to do with the allowances, which Mazio Habwa also talked about, are being addressed, and that during the coming week, all those matters, because I know that the Association of Resident Doctors are planning, or we're planning to go on downing of tools also next week. Now, with what the minister has said on this program earlier today, is there likely to be a shift in that position?
Thank you very much for having me this evening. Well, I would like to appreciate the President of the Pharmaceutical Society of Nigeria for his viewpoint. If I heard him right, he did mention that it is taking the government this long to address issues as little as payment of allowances that have been agreed upon months ago. So at this stand now, it took the government about 3 months to get to the point where we are, to get them to admit and agree that they will pay this hazard allowance and other COVID allowance that has just been promised. So what it means is that it may take a much longer time before these monies will eventually hit the account of the beneficiary. This is to tell you the reluctance that we have in the system to getting things done. Well, as the Honorable Minister has stated that these monies are being worked on, and I will want to convey that to our members for consideration. But as it stands now, what we have, it's still at the level of promises, and the promise is that these monies are being worked upon. And I must tell you that we have been on this for the past 2 months, and we are hoping that his promise will eventually materialize to a positive outcome, and these monies will hit our account.
Dr. Sakomba,
however, I must state...
Please carry on.
State that allowances has never been a major concern for us, and it has never been the major focal point for us embarking on an industrial action. What we had sought to address is the weakened health system, to address the challenges bordering on the health care, the welfare, and then the abilities of healthcare workers providing care, and lastly, to address the inequity that is already existing in the system. Hazard allowance and COVID allowance are promises the government willingly and freely made, and that is why we have added it to part of the demand we are making to embark on this industrial action. To start with, our main focus is to address the issue of the weakened health system. I'm glad we've started the discussion concerning the health system in this country, and I would have loved if you would ask me what we will do to address this problem. Number one problem I think we need to address is the issue of the health system itself, talking about the leadership and governance. You are quite aware that health, unlike other serious items, is considered under the concurrent legislative list, and when other serious fundamental human rights like the security, communications are also considered under the exclusive list. Health, according to the World Health Organization, is a fundamental human right, and we will have thought that considering the importance of health for all the people of the world, health will be given the priority it requires and be moved from the current concurrent list where it belongs to the legislative list where it should belong, so that health will be made available for all people to be able to access health care that they need, irrespective of whether they can afford to pay for it or not, without being faced with the risk of financial hardship. And that is not the case here in the country. We also have the issue of poor funding to the health sector. Recently, in 2001, the government of the people of African countries met to agree to budget 15% of their health expenditure on health. Unfortunately, as we speak, up to this moment, only about 4% of the total health is of the total expenditure is budgeted for health, and as opposed to what was agreed. As we speak now, countries like Chad is able to attain 14% allocation to health. Countries like Ghana is able to attain 13% allocation to health, and even Niger Republic, our neighbor here, has achieved the 15% allocation to health. As we speak now, we are only hovering around 4.5% of the total health expenditure on health. And recently, even the basic healthcare provision fund that the president of the Pharmaceutical Society of Nigeria is talking about, recently, in 2014, the basic healthcare provision fund, which is about 1% of the consolidated health being budgeted, consolidated revenue being allocated to health, has just been slashed in the 2020 budget that has just recently been reviewed by about 43%. That is to tell you the emphasis, the focus Dr. Sakomba, on providing healthcare to Nigerians.
Yes, I know, very, very passionate about it, and it's very serious issues as well. We wish we had more time to discuss it all, but I'm going to have to thank you, the President, National Association of Resident Doctors, Dr. Aliyu Sokomba, for joining us on the program. Thank you so much. And here in Lagos, I'm also going to thank the President of the Pharmaceutical Society of Nigeria, Mazi Sam Ohuabunwa, and of course, Director of Research, Nigeria Institute of Medical Research, Professor Rosemary Audu. Thanks a lot for joining us on this particular segment, and happy Democracy Day. We didn't get a chance to say that, Laddie.
Indeed. Happy Democracy Day to you. Thank you so much for coming in. We'll take a break, and when we return, we'll move on straight to the next segment, which affects just about everybody as well. Please stay on with us.
You're welcome back, everyone. We're celebrating Democracy Day, even though we're in the COVID-19 era. Yes, it has overshadowed a lot of what we do. We spoke about the health sector a couple of minutes ago, a very interesting conversation. Now, one issue that caused many people to have opposing views, at least in the last 5 years, is the economy. Now, there are visible numbers showing real growth, but many say the accompanying development in the lives of over 200 million Nigerians is not so apparent, with added complications now of the lockdown that we had earlier on. And of course, with COVID-19, economists, depending on the ones that you speak to, say there's a real need for us to pause for a moment and examine the state of the economy, Ladi.
Indeed. And one area in which there is significant disagreement, depending on who you talk to, is infrastructural development, which many have described as what drives other aspects of development. And to take a look at that, we're being joined from our Abuja studios, this time by the Minister for Transportation, Honorable Rotimi Amechi. Thank you so much for your time and welcome, and happy Democracy Day to you, Honorable Minister.
Very much.
Let's start off with, your primary forte at this point in time is the railways, and we're talking about moving things back and forth. Where exactly are we with that? Starting, of course, with the Lagos-Ibadan rail line. Has COVID-19 put a dent in your plans?
Yeah, completely. We had a plan to complete in May, but unfortunately, COVID-19 came in March. And that has, I won't say slowed us down, that has completely stopped us. The plan was to complete Lagos-Ibadan in May and resume work, or start work rather, from Ibadan to Kano, beginning from the Kano-Kaduna axis between June and July. Unfortunately, we have not been able to start, even though we now have a presidential directive that we must commence work before September. We are currently meeting with the Chinese company to come out with a strategy in which we can start work before September without having to lose workers to COVID. Again, we believe that before the end of July, we should be at the cabinet seeking approval for the Bonny-Port Harcourt-Maiduguri rail line with the Bonny Deep Sea Port and the industrial park in Port Harcourt. That's where we are now.
Well, Minister, let me bring you back to the Lagos-Ibadan. Thank you for that and just telling us how far you've gone. In terms of all the issues to do with compensation, obviously the lines run through certain routes that pass through people's either plots of land or houses. And yes, the government make the argument of right-of-way. In terms of that, is all that settled on a day like Democracy Day when people are looking to you to hear something positive? Is all that sorted now?
I'll be surprised if there's anybody we're owing. And we're not paying the government rate, we're paying the commercial rate. We allow the experts to value those properties, and we pay at the commercial rate. I'm not sure we're owing anybody. If we are, let the person come forward and we'll be able to pay. We've been able to discharge our responsibility in that regard. Even where we demolished primary schools, we've rebuilt the primary schools. And there are a few places where the communities are complaining about erosion due to the elevation of right of way. That we are looking into to ensure it's not about compensation, it's about ensuring that people don't suffer from erosion. The essence of development is not to bring suffering. It's to ensure that those whose lands are utilized will benefit from it.
The sources of funding for many of these projects, because many of the projects you're talking about, the Lagos-Ibadan rail line, the Kaduna-Kano, the Ibadan-Kano, and the Boni one you mentioned just now that you'll be seeking up, they run into billions of dollars. Can you tell us a little bit about how easy or how difficult it has been to get the funding? How are you getting the funding for this?
It's not been easy. It's been. We must then attribute our success in that regard to the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, President Buhari, and a lot again to the Minister for Finance. The Chinese government has been able to fund Lagos-Ibadan, 1.6 billion, out of which we pay the counterpart funding of 15%. Now, we're going to pay the counterpart funding of the $5.3 billion, which we are borrowing for the Ibadan to Kano. The president has directed the release of about $318 million for this year. Hopefully by next year, more money will be released. We believe that by the time we complete it, we would have been able to complete the contribution of 15% of the $5.3 billion. Similarly, when we commence work on the Port Harcourt-Maiduguri, which starts from Boni, we will also be required to pay the counterpart funding. The most important thing is that the Chinese government and the Chinese people have been very helpful to Nigeria. They've released 1.6 billion for Lagos-Ibadan. They've agreed to approve, and we hope that by October, they should be able to approve the $5.3 billion for the federal government of Nigeria, so that we can commence and complete the construction of the Ibadan to Kano segment of it. We believe that if we conclude our conversation with the Chinese company, we should, before the end of August or September, have commenced work from Kano to Kaduna.
And for the Abuja-Kaduna standard, gauge rail line, it's a bit of a mouthful. There was a lot of fanfare, when it came on stream. We saw the pictures of the rides and all that. Just clarify for us what we hear about whether the line is running at a loss and just how that is being managed, because we know that there is that loan to be serviced. How is that going, and is it working as you expected it to in terms of revenue?
In terms of revenue, initially we were making a loss of about 46 million naira every month. But now we are making a profit of about 109 to 110 million naira in every month. And I know that it's basically because of the pressure on the Kaduna-Abuja road. We believe that when the security improves, there may be the need for gentlemen and ladies to use their cars. But currently, we have moved from 300 passengers per day to about 4,000 passengers per day, per month.
Let me ask you, Honorable Minister, now, earlier on when you were talking about the sources of funding for this, you talked about the Chinese have been very helpful. Now, some of this money is actually loans, right? So we're going to have to pay back. How can many of these projects, which many people would call social services, generate the kind of revenue to allow us to pay back these loans without resort to other means?
Sorry, initially I had said that we have 4,000 passengers per month. No, we have 4,000 passengers per day. So if we're making 109 to 110 million naira, we've gotten approval from the president and the cabinet to secure that money and begin to pay back to the Chinese government. We believe that about 3 to 4 months we give you about $1 million. That's not enough to pay the entire loan. But by the time you begin to run from Lagos to Kano, it will no longer be making 109 million. It will be making much more than that, because at that point you have to include cargoes. And when you include cargoes, the the cost of transportation for cargoes is by far higher than the cost of transportation for passengers. So somehow, nearly half of it could be paid from the running of the rail lines. But most importantly is that the government has to fund it. But you don't have to look at the possibility of repayment. What you should look at is what is the contribution of rail to the development of the economy and the Nigeria and the people of Nigeria. You will agree with me that cost of goods are informed by the cost of transportation. You also agree with me to a great extent that the economy cannot be propelled to growth if the transportation sector is in comatose. So basically, you cannot do without transportation. The roads are bad. When they walk on the road, you need to reduce the volume of cargoes that go by the road. And when you do that, you secure and protect the roads. And those goods will be transferred to the rail lines. So you can't quantify the benefits that you get out of these rail lines. You can't quantify the benefits you get out of transportation. You can't quantify the number of jobs you create out of this. All that will be part of the process of reform. So you don't look at how the ability of the rail lines to generate cash to be able to pay back. It will be extremely difficult to do that. We believe that other sectors of the economy may have to contribute to pay back the loans we are taking.
All right, Honorable Minister for Transportation, Rotimi Amaechi, thanks a lot for joining us on the program. Happy Democracy Day to you as well.
Thank you very much, and I wish you the same.
Yeah. Now, we're going to be crunching some numbers now. Anytime we talk about the economy, we have to look at the figures and understand what they actually mean and say. And of course, to do that for us is the CEO, Financial Derivatives, Mr. Bismarck Rewane, with a broad smile there. And I know that all day, you've been sending us data about what the economy is just looking like in the last 21 years, and even with COVID in the last 1 year, let's say in the last couple of months. Mr. Rewane.
Thank you. Today is Democracy Day, and freedom of political association is always accompanied, or should usually be accompanied, by freedom of economic transactions. But one thing you must know is that there's what we call 1 in 100-year probability. That is like when you have an economic and financial crisis coming together. Financial crisis of the markets, economic crisis, a crisis of output. So we had one in 1929, we had another one in 2009. But usually after that type of crisis, it's followed by political problems. Basically, the economic crisis leads to political problems. At times, political problems lead to economic crisis. So after the 1929 Great Depression, we had the emergence of Nazism in Germany under Hitler. We had it in Spain, Franco. We had Benito Mussolini in Italy, fascism. So economic crisis also leads to political crisis. Now we've seen a situation now that in 2008 we had the economic and financial crisis, which led to the emergence of Obama in the United States. Now the change and the inequality in income distribution has also led to this. Now we have the COVID crisis. Is the COVID crisis going to lead to a change in the political terrain in the world? Yes, but let us look at what has happened in the last, and I would say the last decade. But we started democracy in 1999. It's been a swing, and it's been a long journey from prosperity to austerity and then to recovery. In between, we've had 2 recessions. One in 2008, one in 2008, which is not in Nigeria, that was global. In 2016, we had a recession, and now we are going into another recession. But in between, we've had a recovery. Now, this is the situation. In 2008, we had huge buffers. If you take your external reserves minus your external debt, we had about $48 billion in 2008. We had about $14 billion of buffers, whereas slim in 2016, and now we have no buffers anymore. So, and that's where we are. So it's your buffers are used to withstand the shocks. So we don't have that. Next slide, please. So I think that's what we have to bear in mind. Our ability to take the shocks in 2008 was much stronger. And the ability to take the shocks in 2016 was even less strong than what we had in 2008. But now we don't have those buffers. If anything, we have more debt and less reserves. Now, in 2008, when President Aradwa was there, we had the average rate of growth before then. Over the 5 years before then, we had 8% average rate of growth. We had an exchange rate of 118 naira to a dollar. We had huge buffers, and the adjustments were swift. Very quickly, we moved from 118 to 155, and the economy recovered. In 2015, 2016, it was transition year. Part of it was under Jonathan, part of it was under President Buhari. The buffers were average. The response was kind of slow because it was a new government, new transition. Situation got worse before we recovered. So we recovered and we've had 6, 7, 8 quarters of positive growth. And then in this period, we are just getting into recession. We are still at 1.8 in Q1, but then in Q2, definitely we are going into the negative. Like today in the UK, they had minus 20% growth. The lowest growth they've had since records were being kept. We are in a different world. The price of oil in 2015 was $40. In 2008, the price of oil was $97. We got here as low as $25 a barrel, and now we are back to about $38 a barrel. Oil markets tanked again, and the global GDP projected to contract by 3%. The entire world is now going to a crisis. In 2008, price of petrol was 97 naira per liter. But if you use the exchange rate, it was 82 cents. And we had queues in 2008. In 2015, 2016, the price was 87 naira a liter, which was 44 cents. And now we had queues as well. But ever since then, there's been an adjustment. We came to 145. Now it is 123.5 or 121.5. And if you use the current exchange rate, it's about 25 cents a dollar. So we are paying less in dollar terms for petrol, but we're getting, there are no queues, as you can see for yourself. So from queues, fast adjustment, queues, slow adjustment, and then now we've addressed it, and then we have the problem. But it still exists, the problem still exists. Next slide. So, how have we fared in the healthcare? We talked about healthcare. In 2008, we were dealing with HIV, and our life expectancy was 51 years. In 2015, we're dealing with Ebola. Life expectancy went up to about 52. Now we're dealing with COVID. Life expectancy is even up to 53. So we are doing better in terms of life expectancy. Now, what do the numbers say? In 2010, GDP was about $389 billion. In 2015, because of exchange rate adjustments, we're at $492 billion. By the end of 2020, we are going to go down. This is projections for the end of the year to $344 billion. In 2010, growth was 7.8. 2015, growth was 2.7. And now we are projecting to grow at minus 3.4, but we think we'll do worse on that, about minus 5%. Inflation was 13.7% in 2010. It came down to 9% in 2015. We think it's now at 12.3. We think to go up to about 16%, if not more, at the end of the year. External reserves, $32 billion in 2010, down to $29 billion. Right now it's 36, but we think that by the time we fund all of these activities, it will come down to about $28 billion at the end of the year. The exchange rate was 150 in 2010 in the parallel market. It was 199 or 193 in 2015. And in the parallel market today, it's about 450 naira to a dollar. We think it remains stable that way. Now, most important is that you are dealing with, of the 7 commodities we looked at, apart from tomatoes and yam, every other thing has
gone up.
Actually depreciated and gone up. So rice was 9,000 naira a bag in 2015. It went down to 16,000 naira in 2018. It's now up to 28,000 naira because of COVID and panic buying. Pepper, you can see, gone up by 62%. Indomie noodles went up by 5%. Semovita up by 17%. And yellow gari has gone all the way from 5,000 to 14,500, up by 107%. So, your basket, food inflation was 10% in June 15. The basket was huge. You could buy a lot. In 2018, the basket got smaller. And it was 12.95% food inflation. This year, food inflation is 15.75. The basket is almost disappearing.
It's almost being replaced by a bowl now, not a basket anymore.
Well, maybe we will have less obesity. So this is the picture, okay? Transportation cost has increased. Medical bills are higher. International school fees, if you have to go abroad, is higher. And air tickets, there's no flights. So that's where you are. So non-food inflation is also spiking. Now, if you invest in the stock market in 2010, 2015, and 2020, you lost money. Some people forgot about the stock market and went for Ponzi schemes. All those ones failed. They went to MMM, they lost money. They went to Swiss Gold, they lost everything. They lost their shirts. That's what happened. So, but now we are beginning to see recovery. So if you invest wisely and legally, then that's why. So here's the story. Economic recovery and then down, COVID. That's the story. But slow and painful recovery. What are the lessons we've learned? Fiscal and external shocks will always exist for oil-dependent economies. Oil got us into recession, oil got us out. Oil got us into recession again, oil got us out. So we have to do away with this addiction to oil revenues. Investment is key. The government cannot invest for you. We've heard of all these nice programs. The government's business is not investment. The government's business is to facilitate activity. So what are we going to do about investments? So we have the Economic Recovery and Growth Plan 1 and 2. We have the challenges to address. We have a recessionary gap of 11.8%, and we have suboptimal investment, and we are vulnerable to exogenous shocks. Our external buffers are depleting. This is the challenge. Well, what is inevitable? Our exchange rate has to be convertible, whether we like it or not. The investment in road and rail transport, Rotimi was talking about it. We must invest and continue to invest in this and provide that. Airport concession is inevitable. We have to block leakages. We have to simplify tax administration, cost-related tariffs, and exchange rate adjustment. All of these things are being done. So it's not what we're going to do. These things are being done right now. We have to lease and sell some of the idle assets, convert power sector loans into equity, and shift subsidies from wasteful consumption to critical social infrastructure, health, education. These are the maybes. Well, now, what does the world think of Nigeria at this point? The AIU says stagflation is expected. Naira devaluation will elevate inflation. Debt servicing costs will jump. Well, the IMF says we must begin to tighten our liquidity. We must expedite and stop multiple exchange rates. We can't have multiple exchanges. And also, we begin to focus on developing social infrastructure and macroeconomic stability. Finally, these are numbers, what it will look like through 2022. The GDP will grow back to $438 billion by 2022. Private consumption will increase. Inflation by year end will go up all the way to 18 in 2020, but come down to 10.5, as you can see. M2 growth will accelerate. The exchange rate will stabilize. Oil production will increase. And our share of world investment will go from 0.18, which it is today, to 0.29. Our share of world exports will increase from 0.24 to 0.31. These are good signs. Finally, the outlook, the recovery is going to be slow but solid. The new ERGP plan will be launched very soon. The Minister of Finance is going to be talking about that and national planning. The economy will fall into recession with growth of approximately -5 this year. But like everybody else in the world, there's a U-shaped recovery that we will go down, we will languish at the bottom, and then we'll come back up, but solid. Inflation will spike above 15% before falling on higher output. Finally, the federal government will further liberalize factor prices in electricity, petrol, exchange rate. The Naira will be allowed to trade at its real effective exchange rate. There's no other way. You cannot manage that. Trying to manage the exchange rate in a subsidized way is like trying to catch a falling knife. You will never win. So this is where we are, and this is what will
just
come
one
from.
question, Mr. Rwani. I know quickly now, you showed us the food baskets, and I know a lot of people were worried when they saw when you said the food basket is disappearing. Moving on from 2020, what kind of food baskets are we going to see, and how worried are you
Food
about
basket
it?
is going to get bigger.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because we are going to be working harder, and a shift in the economy towards more productive activity will be there.
All right.
Mr. Rwani, there's a lot to take in there, and a lot to chew on, both in terms of policy and what to expect. And a lot of people would probably still be trying to digest that all the way up until this year is going to be tough. What I got from what you said, this year is going to be tough, but once we scale through, then the recovery slow but solid.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that. Thank you for your time. Thank you for joining us on the program this evening. Mr. Bismarck Rwani is the Chief Executive Officer of Financial Derivatives Company. They do this sort of thing for a living, actually. Thank you so much.
And they make it look so easy while they're at it. Yeah.
Thank you so much. We'll take a break. When we come back, we'll come and talk about one of the really difficult, challenging areas of our national life. Please stay on with us. Thanks for staying with us. Welcome back. As I said before the break, we'll now be talking about the more difficult, the more challenging area that tends to affect every other area, and that is politics. What has brought us to today being Democracy Day, June 12th. Quite a lot of things have happened on the political front, and a lot of it has had to do with political actors, what they are doing, what they're not doing, how they're doing it, and how they're not doing it. But we're going to kick off by introducing one of the major players in Nigeria's politics today. He is the helmsman of the ruling party, the All Progressives Congress, that is, the APC. Joining us from our Abuja studios is Comrade Adams Oshomole. Good evening, Comrade, and thank you for joining us at this time.
Thank you very much.
Before we come to Democracy Day, I mean, a lot of people started off the day thinking, well, okay, yes, we need to be a bit sober, especially given the fact that this is happening within the era of COVID-19. And then this bolt out of the blue came out of your home state, Edo, which has been in the news recently. What was your initial reaction to what happened in Edo State today, the disqualification of Governor Godwin Obaseki at the screening level for the party primaries?
Well, if we be prejudiced, I can't comment on it now. What I said is all I can say, namely that we are just following our party constitution. We have a screening committee. They turned out a report, and the report is subject to the appeal committee for anyone who chooses to appeal against the findings of the screening committee. And the purpose of the screening is basically to say that nothing is taken for granted. And until they go through the appeal process, I, as the national chairman, I cannot comment on it.
Well, it isn't the subject, the matters surrounding this are not new, which is why I asked for your initial reaction. We are taking Democracy Day today, and this is about democracy, party politics, line politics. Godwin Obaseki was, depending on who you ask, your political ally. Definitely this must have come to you as some kind of surprise. After all, he was cleared with the same documents earlier, so that's why I'm asking the question what your reaction was.
Actually, I think you know much better than that. If it is assumed that anybody who has been screened before or who has contested the election before should not be screened again, then it could have been so expressly stated in our constitution. I'm sure, Akre, you know that earlier this year or so, we had a city senator who is still sitting as we speak, and who contested as deputy governor in Bayelsa State. And we all assumed that having passed screening and even being current senator, the requirement of being a senator is exactly the same thing as the requirement for any other office. And the Supreme Court found that there were discrepancies that were not observed in the past, and for which the man was disqualified, and we lost the state. I don't want you to reduce this state to Edo State. You are trying to drag me to the arena. We will stick to the procedure, and I will refuse to discuss this matter further.
APC National Chairman, I'm not dragging you into any arena, but let us expand the discussion. We are talking about democracy. Other things have since come up. The battle for restructuring the federation has been one of the central themes of the time. And I'm wondering if, given every other thing that you've seen happening, both on the economic front, on the political front, on the security front, and so on, if now would be a good enough time to, COVID aside, address some of these issues.
I think these issues are being discussed every day. I mean, when we hear the National Assembly talking about reviewing the Constitution, there's a way in which that can impact on the way in which things are currently done. We have spoken on this matter before. I think there is one area in which there seems to be a level of unanimity, namely that we need devolution of powers. Let the state play much more important role and reduce those items on the exclusive list, and concomitantly review the revenue allocation formula in favor of the state and less at the center, so that the state can really be the theater of development. And I think the argument is not so complex. The longer the cable, the more the distortion. And I also think that in the context of national stability, if we put more resources in the state and less at the center, there will be more competition among and between the states, and maybe less focus at the center, such that nobody is under the illusion that once you have the center, you seem to control 60% of the national resource. I'm convinced about the merit of devolution of powers, because my problem with the word restructuring, the manner that you have used it, is that, you know, it could easily mean many things to many people and means nothing to anyone. So we have to speak to the specifics. What do you want to restructure? What are the specific elements that needs to be revisited? And that is why, for me, what I think is clear to me is that we need to review the revenue allocation formula. We need to revisit devolution of powers.
All right, Comrade Oshomole, we'll come back to you, but let me introduce at this point the former Special Assistant on New Media to the former Speaker of our House of Representatives, Rinsola Abiola. Thanks a lot for joining us on the program.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, we'll come back to you. And of course, here with us in Lagos, friend of the house, Professor of Law, Professor Akin Oyebode. Thank you so much, Prof, for joining us, and happy Democracy Day to you on this day that means quite a bit to you. I know we were talking about it earlier. Prof, looking at our politics and what has played out, not just today or in the last 6 years or 5 years, in the last 21, is this where you expect us to be now, Prof?
Well, I think this is a work in progress. The question of the Nigerian political system, it's problematic. It's an ongoing issue. You recall that I was a member of the Confab in 2014, and the question of the nature of the polity and what needs to be done to ameliorate its dysfunctionality resonated very loudly at the Confab. I remember the Confab came up with over 600 recommendations. Unfortunately, nothing has been done to date to effectuate those recommendations, which will have made the Nigerian polity a little bit easier to understand, to enhance its functionality. The word restructuring might be problematic to some people, but to most objective observers, the system we are operating is very dysfunctional and counterproductive. So we might, if we don't want to touch any of the recommendations of the confab, then at least you need another forum, not the National Assembly. The National Assembly is to make laws for the peace, order, and good governance of Nigeria. It's not a constituent assembly. It is neither the place nor the role or function of the National Assembly to give us a constitution. The constitutions are higher than workaday legislatures. So we have to get things first, recognize the inadequacies of the present arrangement and create a forum where we can redress the imbalances and the dysfunctionality, as I put it, of what we have. Politics, like Lenin once pointed out, is an expression, concentrated expression, he called it, of economics. If you look at the Nigerian economy, the economy is nosediving. I know you spoke to my friend before bringing me on. I didn't have the opportunity of listening to Bismarck Riwani, but he's the guru on this question of economics. And if Nigeria wants a well-functional economic setup, we have to tackle the economic issue because the law is superstructural on the base, which is the economy. But as I said, the problematic of Nigeria is multifaceted, multifarious, very complex, and it takes a large heart to really recognize the inadequacy of the system that we are operating. So if there's a consensus that there's an intolerable level of dysfunctionality, then we must, one way or another, confront that issue and create a viable framework, move from the prevailing paradigm to a paradigm that will win the confidence of the preponderant majority of Nigerians, the various ethnic groups or nationalities, over 400 of them, that constitute Nigeria, so that we give the Nigerian experiment a shot in the arm. How we are going to go about it, we might continue to debate, but it's not just a question of cosmetics. It's not just a question of amending the Constitution. So for me, it's more fundamental, because the Constitution determines who gets what, when, and how, and in fact, how much. So there are all sorts of contending issues. If I recall rightly, the confab had a constellation of stars, more than 40 retired generals. Professors there were quite a sizable number. Former governors, deputy governors, judges, name it. I don't know if we can come up with such an arrangement again in terms of the constellation of stars that constituted membership of the confab. But whatever happens, we need either to take a fresh look at the recommendations of the confab so that we can elicit and decipher some of the urgent problems of the day so that, as we say in Nigeria, we can move the nation forward. That, for me, is the basic minimum that needs to be done in order for us to even celebrate 12th of June, because that is what we are talking about. 27 years thereafter, what has changed? Abiola is dead, and a stadium or whatever has been named after him. But the problematic of Nigeria is deepening. It's not, there's little amelioration that has been done. So the basic issues confronting the Nigerian polity subsist, and we can't run away from that fact.
All right, let me go now to Abuja, to Rinsola Abiola. I mean, you've heard from Prof. What he's talked about, you know, the baseline and the fundamentals. Another challenge that we seem to see is youth involvement, youth engagement. Nobody wants to hear leaders of tomorrow anymore. You've done a lot of advocacy, etc. On a day like this, what's your opinion about what their engagement should be for us to see a different sort of politics?
Well, we've been able to achieve a measure of progress when it comes to youth inclusion in governance and politics. During the last assembly, we were able to get the Not Too Young to Run bill to pass, which reduced the age of eligibility for elective office. And we saw quite a number of young people contesting for elective office across the country. Some made the cut. We have a number of young people in state assemblies. We have a number of young people in the National Assembly, especially in the House of Representatives. It's helped to awaken the younger generation to our political responsibilities. We know that, okay, this is a country, we want things to be better, but we also have a role to play. So it was a watershed moment for Nigerian youths when that age of eligibility was reduced. But minus that, we also need to look at certain issues that militate against youth inclusion in governance generally. For instance, everybody knows that politics in this part of the world is notoriously expensive. Politics is expensive the world over, but in Nigeria it is even more so. To get the most basic things done within the political process, you have to spend a lot of money. So there are quite a number of young people who have their hearts and their heads in the right place, who are fully committed to contributing their quota to development, but they are not able to go beyond the financial barrier which would enable them present themselves for political office. What we essentially have is, if we're not able to reduce this, for instance, if we're not able to successfully work on this, our democracy essentially is going to be to the highest bidder. It's going to be about who can spend the most on campaigns, who can afford to pay as many people as possible. And then the challenge with that is that when people buy their way into positions of authority, they don't feel any need whatsoever to be accountable to the people. So there's a lot of reorientation that we need to do, especially also on the part of the people, because we all have a responsibility towards this country. We all have a role to play in ensuring that we elect the best of us to lead us. And that's, I believe, is the best way that we can record measurable progress.
Comrade Oshomole, I'll come back to you for this one, and that speaks to the whole structure on which things are based, which Professor Oyebode talked about, and which, to a lesser extent, Rinsola Abiola has also pointed to, which is that money needs to get spent a lot. Do you think, given what has happened in the last couple of months, the introduction of situations where large crowds and gatherings, which are synonymous with political activity, may now be in abeyance, do things like that present opportunities for those who may not have the exact means that used to be required to involve themselves into politics a bit deeper, given our own situation and context?
Well, first, let me appreciate Professor Oyebode. He's a very well-respected elder comrade, and I want to say hi to him. I also want to make it clear, I am not, in a sense, opposed to what people refer to as restructuring. I'm simply saying that we need to speak to specific elements that needs to be looked at, because it simply means too many things to too many people. So, like you said, maybe it will not be out of place. I think it's the right point to make, and I support him entirely, to look at not only the 2014 conference, but there were a couple of conferences, one under Obasanjo, I think two under Obasanjo, and then the one under Jonathan. Maybe in all of those documents, there are a couple of things that can be picked, and we looked at it. I like to speak to specifics so that we are all on the same page. When I was governor, people came to me who are elder statesmen, the kind of people he described, former governors, former ministers, basically people who have been in government and who can be said to have been substantially accountable for Nigeria almost becoming a unitary state. And some of them were probably even members of the 21 wise men that drafted a constitution that was decreed on the people at one time or the other. So I'm not averse to that at all, but it's just that for the ordinary man on the street, we need to know what exactly do we need to look at. But there's no question. Anything can be better. Just anything can be better. And if anything can be better, we can try our hands and see how we can get it better done. Now, with regards to the issue of cost of campaign, I think it depends on the individual. If all you have to offer is money to procure people's conscience, then you need tons of it. I wouldn't have been a governor of Edo State. I would have been elected at the time I was elected in 2007 and defeated the almighty PDP at the peak of his power and control, both in Abuja and in Edo State, if it was about the highest bidder. I think people will, let me reduce this to ordinary man understanding. There's a saying in my place that if you don't have money, you should have sweet mouth. But you can't lack both and think that out of sympathy, people will just catapult you to power. I mean, we see young people in France not being a member of the club of billionaires, under 40, under 35, becoming president of a very advanced country. And it is not a function of his pocket, but he has capacity to appeal to minds of those who have to raise money. In all democracies, those who contest election are people who warm themselves to the heart of those who are interested in policy issues. And to the extent that they have a message that resonates with them, they are willing to raise funds. It could be $1, it could be $10, it could be ₦1, it could be 2,000 naira, it could be 1 million naira, and donate to support a candidate. If, for example, Nigeria youth decide that just a factor of age is all that we need to correct the country, and they identify a young man or a young woman who wants to contest, and they all offer to put in 100 naira each, maybe you can raise money to contest for a certain level of election. I think for me, the issue is what I would want to see done differently in Nigeria is that we do not focus sufficiently on policy issues. I mean, I'm in trouble sometimes when, I'm a national chairman, but even when we politicians go out, since I cannot now exclude myself, and say we are going to construct, pave gold-plated roads, nobody asks us where is the money going to come from. And tax issues are never on discussion. There are no policy contestation, which is why ethnic champions hijack the process and feed us with religious issues, ethnic issues, and even now youth issues. For me, these do not go deep enough, and even women issues. For example, I've had a cause to ask women, in your parliamentary days, how come you didn't think that this issue of women not, a man marries in the morning, a young lady, 20 years later, he marries another one, divorces the old one, and the woman is going away without any property. Why can't we change the law such that if you must separate from me, then we must share our asset, the way it's done in Europe? If I see women in National Assembly pushing salties, it will have a lot of appeal to me. But just to say, because I'm a woman, meanwhile you canvass views that are as anti-women as any other person. For me, those sort of superficial things are not deep enough. No question. This country, a lot of things can be done better. And we'll have to strive to try to get many things improved upon. There's no question. I don't have any business defending anyone. I have my own reservation about a couple of things. But what I do not accept is that when I see people who are more vociferous in some of these matters, and they do not include people like Professor Ibode, no, because he, like some of us, has been criticizing the system. But when I see people who are responsible for the current structure, those who move us away from regional politics to repartitioning the country by the force of a decree, and those who serve in those governments, that fundamentally altered the way Nigeria Federation was formed in 1960, talking about the structure. I'm like, who is responsible for the structure the way it is?
Okay, Comrade.
So
let me just put you on pause there briefly, because I know we can continue to go on, but I want to give Prof an opportunity to respond to some of what you've said quickly, Prof, because I can see you smiling and nodding at a particular point. Would you like to respond to him quickly?
Yes, Comrade Oshiomhole is well known to us as a comrade in the struggle. And he will accept that Decree 24 of 1999, which we now call the Nigerian Constitution, is a misfit. We have to go back to the tenets of federalism. We have a quasi-federal setup. We have almost what you can call a centripetal and centrifugal federal setup. We want a setup where we, the people, will actually be the people that bring into existence the fundamental law that will order our rights. A situation where judges have to be nominated by the National Judicial Council to the Senate for appointment, irrespective of the state we are talking about, is a misnomer. A situation where states have to go cap in hand to Abuja every month for handout. What I think is Okere Madu, who called it feeding bottle federalism. We have to get away from that. Really give Nigerians a sense of belonging, believing that we jointly own this country together. And we don't want a situation where appointments will be weighed in favor of just one part of Nigeria. You want the best and the brightest. These are matters to be discussed, not to be peremptorily applied just because somebody is in power. So what I'm saying is very fundamental. The right of Nigerians to go to heaven the way they want. Okay, if we agree on the ground rules. And Bola Ige was dead right when he said Nigerians have to sit around the table and ask a question. Do we want to live together? And if so, how? Those are the two issues that are still bothering for attention. So I don't think Comrade Oshiomhole would be aghast. You might call it restructuring, you might call it reconfiguration, you might call it redressing, you can call it anything. But the way Nigeria is run, is governed today, as I said, is completely dysfunctional. We need a paradigm shift from the status quo, because Nigerian politics seem to be in a perpetual state of becoming. We have to sit down and negotiate, renegotiate the basis of our living together. That is what we mean by facing the problems of Nigeria squarely, so that by the time of my grandchildren, for instance, they will not be complaining about being treated as second-class citizens in their country. That's all. It's not too difficult a task. Okay? Decree 24 has outlived its usefulness. It's been masquerading as the Constitution of Nigeria for the last how many years? We now have to reach an agreement as to the modalities of cohabitation, which is what I believe those who are hankering after restructuring want done. Nigeria, as I said, we're in a state of becoming, but we now have to face up to the brass tacks, create a new Nigeria for all of us, so that we will not hear these discordant voices, you know, of alienation, marginalization, or even a notion where some people feel not included. You want an inclusive arrangement where you will never have to apologize for where you were born or who your parents were. Look, the young people have to relate to the old people. Look at somebody like Trudeau, Prime Minister of Canada, in his 40s. Look at Pierre Macron, okay, in France.
in his 40s. He's president of France. So enough of these gerontocrats, you know, who are not too far away from their graves. And they should let the young people contribute significantly to the running of Nigeria. Not exclusively. I don't believe that we can, like some of my younger friends say, that we are dinosaurs, that we should surrender to them, that we are, as I said, a few meters away from the grave. No, but I think the young people have to accommodate the older people, but not for the older people to say, yes, you young people, you have the right to run after we are finished with our dinner. But, you know, only bones are left for latecomers. So I don't think the young people want to wait that long. As you said, Madam Moderator, people no longer want to be described as leaders of tomorrow. They want to start leading now, here and now. And you have examples of young people, vibrant, savvy, and who understand the workings of government, who can make a difference. When I was a student, Pierre Trudeau was Prime Minister in Canada. Now, Justin, his son, is Prime Minister. And you can see the gap. As students, we saw Trudeau driving in traffic, no sirens, the sort of things that we are still looking for in Nigeria. Pierre Trudeau was a professor of constitutional law with his neckerchief and whatever. He was Prime Minister. Now his son is. And the way his son is even handling Trump, you will see the difference is clear. I mean, when he speaks about the position of Canada vis-a-vis United States of America, you can see the vibrancy.
It would. I've been looking for a point at which to jump in, but that doesn't seem to be a very good point. But we'll round up this discussion with Risola Abiola in our Abuja studios. Risola, both Comrade Oshomole and Professor Oyebode have spoken about the youth in involvement in all of this, and the fact that their lack thereof has impacted negatively on what would have been an otherwise positive development. Going forward, what do you hope to see?
Well, first off, I would want to respectfully disagree with His Excellency, the National Chairman of the APC, especially regarding the point he raised about women in Parliament not pushing certain kinds of legislation. As at 1999, when we returned to democracy, women made up 3.1% of the House of Representatives and about 2.8% of the Senate. Presently, women hold about 3.4% of the House of Reps and maybe roughly about 6.8% of the Senate or thereabouts. Women don't have the required numbers to push legislation through, even if they wanted to. I worked in the National Assembly in the last assembly, and when the bill, the Constitution Amendment Bill for affirmative action, in line with the Convention on Elimination on Discrimination Against Women, came up, the women did lobby extensively. The Speaker even called for a second vote, but enough votes were not secured for that amendment to scale through. So it's not because women are not trying, it's not because those who are in political office are not putting in effort, it's simply because we don't have enough numbers. And I don't think that Nigerian women are calling for inclusion simply because they're women. We describe democracy as a government of the people, for the people, and by the people. Women are people too. Women make up 47.1% of Nigeria's voter register. We come out in numbers and we vote. We support candidates. I don't think we're not seeking inclusion just based on gender. We're seeking inclusion because gender mainstreaming will go a long way to ensure that we design and we implement policies that would work for everybody, women inclusive. Regarding youth inclusion, we are trying, during the last elections, there was an organization set up to try to create that culture of crowdfunding for political office, for young people aspiring to political office, because we realized that finances were an issue. And as the Honorable Chairman also rightly noted, in countries like France, we have young people stepping up to the plate. But then I don't think that we can fully compare the political system in a country like France with the one that we run here in Nigeria. And in as much as, some of us were able to raise funds from amongst friends, from amongst families, the thing is, political office leadership should not be the sole preserve of privileged young people. Nigeria has a large percentage of people who live in poverty or who are struggling to climb out of the depths of poverty. They should not be barred from aspiring to leadership positions simply because they do not have the means to. And on our own part, as young people in this country, we are trying to cultivate a culture of crowdfunding for political office. For those that we believe in, whom we know have what it takes to get to office and represent our interests and protect our interests, to fight for this country's unity and stand up for what is right. So it's a challenge that we are also working on. We're not asking for inclusion just because we're young or just because we're women or just because there are people with disabilities in this country. We're asking for inclusion because democracy should be fully inclusive, because nobody should be left behind, because we have to push for progress together, and because when we work together, that's the only way that we can achieve the necessary progress for us to move
That's
forward
how we're going to have to leave it. Risola, I know you're very passionate about this. All our guests this evening are quite passionate about the positions they hold. Lest there are those still wondering, Risola Abiola, of course, is a daughter of the late Chief Moshood Abiola, who is believed to have won the June 12, 1993 presidential election, and that's the basis of celebrating Democracy Day on June 12. Let's thank all our guests, Professor Akin Oyebode, Comrade Adams Oshomole, the APC National Chairman, who joined us from Abuja, as well as Ms. Risola Abiola, who is also in our Abuja studios. Thank you all for joining us, and happy Democracy Day. We'll take a break. When we come back, we'll go to another segment. Please stay on with us. Thanks for staying tuned. Welcome back to our Democracy Day special programming here on Channels Television. At this point, we'll be taking a look at something else that concerns everybody and has assumed a major dimension in more recent times, and that is talking about security. COVID-19 has made it even more difficult or easier, depending on who you ask, to address the problems of security. But we have a good panel in-house here to take a look at this, starting from our Lagos studios here, where we're joined by a security expert. Of course, he's president of Transworld Securities Limited, Dr. Ona Ekomo. It's nice to have you back.
Thank you, Ladi.
Also sitting beside him is Colonel Yomi Dare, who is a retired Army officer. He's also a friend of the house. Thank you for being with us, Colonel
Thank you very much, and happy Democracy Day.
Happy Democracy Day to you too. From our Abuja studios, we are joined by the Chief of Defense Information, Major General John Enenche. Good evening, General. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Sitting beside him is presidential spokesman, Senior Special Advisor to the President in Media and Publicity, Mr. Femi Adesina. Mr. Adesina, of course, also a friend of the House. Thank you for your time on this Democracy Day.
Thank you.
Lady, I was going to start off with Dr. Ona, intentionally so, because security is your thing, and you've been in it for quite a while. Do Nigerians, those who come to you, who talk to you about their security needs, do they feel any safer than they did 21 years ago, or in the last 1 year even? Do people feel safer right now?
It's not a simple yes or no answer. You have to look at the time, because time is an explicit variable in analyzing a level of safety, or in fact, perhaps the inverse form of your question, or the obverse side of your question is, what is the performance? I think you have to look at what are we talking about? We're talking about robberies. Are we talking about insurgency? Are we talking about banditry, which I call terrorism? What is it really that we're talking about? Or is it just a feeling of how safe the people feel? For example, when we had, Ladi talked about COVID here just now. When we had the full lockdown here in Lagos, we had the Awawa boys marching through the streets, the Million Boy gangs marching through the streets, and now now, more recently, even in today's paper, I did an interview where we were talking about traffic robberies. We're talking about, you know, the kinds of things, or even now, more recently with the rape of Uwa in Benin. You know, so these are all different security risks, perhaps even threats also. So we have to say, what is it that Nigerians want? So how do we, what about kidnapping? Is it more prevalent now, or is it on the low side? Because really you can't abolish all crimes, you can't make everybody safe, but they can feel more safe or less safe. So it's a more or less issue. And I think right now, it depends. If you are in Maiduguri, you will probably be feeling less safe right now because of you know, more recent incidents, or even Sokoto, Katsina, Zamfara. You will probably also be feeling less safe in certain local governments. Southern Kaduna, you also be feeling less safe. But you know, here in Lagos, the relaxation of the COVID has kind of eased up things, but then you have the traffic issues where people close late, they are going home, they are attacked in traffic. So you know, it depends on how the authorities assess these security threats and address them. That is what ends up as service to the public, whether they feel more safe or less safe. So I think I'll just say it's a mixed bag. It depends on what you are looking at.
Okay, let's go to Abuja studios. Let me put that question to Mr. Femi Adesina. You're the president's spokesperson, but you also move around a lot, and you're also privy to most of the reports that Dr. Ekomo and others would be making reference to. Let me put Ijeoma's question to you, but slightly differently. In the last 5 years, from 2015 to now, and then again in the last 1 year, how have you assessed the security situation?
Yeah, thank you. I'll say yes, in the last 5 years, there have been advances in the security situation, a lot of advances. We have suffered some reversals, which are quite sad, which are regrettable, but then there have been a lot of advances. 5 years ago, you had bombings everywhere, including in Abuja. You had in Northeast, you had in Northwest, you had in North Central. But today is not the situation. You still have pockets of attacks in different parts of the country, but they are not as concerted and concentrated as we had 5 years ago. So now, compared to 5 years ago, there is a wide difference.
How about from a year ago?
Yes, that's why I said there are advances and there are some reversals. But if you want to look at the average, the advances far outweigh the reversals. When the reversals come, they are quite bad and sad, and they are dampeners. But then, if you compare the advances and the reversals, you will see that the advances far outweigh the reversals.
Okay, Major General Leche, let me put it to you then, because there's a reason I asked that security question at the beginning. I know Mr. Adesina has talked about there have been some advances and reversals, but if you look at the World Report for 2020, we're not scored very high in terms of where our security is now. And the specific area they're talking about is conduct of the security forces and abuses, etc. Where are we on that right now in terms of getting the men and women of the force to, you know, improve on civil-military relations, etc., so that people actually do feel a bit more safe, not just in terms of where they are, but, you know, in the prosecution of insurgency, etc.?
Good. What I want to understand you, let us put it clear. What you mean by civil-military relations. When we talk about civil-military relations, there are two dimensions of it, so many dimensions, but two main ones. What are you doing with the public? How are you relating with them? Vis-a-vis international human rights laws and international humanitarian laws, guided by extant conventions such as laws of armed conflict, and then how you deal with civilians. first and foremost, in the area of civil-military relations, the normal thing is that you relate with them with the best practices as established by Eastern regulations and laws, like I said. And I tell you that the armed forces of Nigeria, cutting across the services, Nigerian Army, Navy, and the Air Force, they have done wonderfully well in that regard. Now, if you talk about the conflict areas, particularly in the Northeast, are we following the rules of engagement? Are we guided by the laws of armed conflict? Are we following all the Eastern regulations of how to handle civilians in conflict and then, as people that surrender? I will tell you yes, because let us not forget about propaganda of our common enemy, in this case, the terrorists, the bandits, as the case may be, and then other criminals. They will want to make a mountain out of a mole. Like, for instance, some of the stories that came out, the reports, so-called reports, by some international organizations. You just pick one person who was not properly profiled, who we are not even sure whether he was one of the ex-combatants or one of those that surrendered, or one of those that maybe in the course of the fog of war, fog of the conflict, was one of those arrested and then profiled before being released, and then you say the person claimed to have been maltreated. What I can say here is that from our training and best practice, and we collaborate in addition with other organizations. You have the Red Cross, you have the United Nations reps and other people in the theaters of operations, particularly in the Northeast. So I would say that to a large extent, we are guided by these regulations, and our officers and men in the fronts, they respect the rules of the game. So I would say that, like you said, in the last 1 year, all those reports, if you subject them to forensic analysis, yes, I would say it is not correct. It is not a true picture, as it were. That does not mean that there are not a few infractions here and there, of which we are handled appropriately. You know that we have human rights decks in the Army, Navy, and the Air Force, and all the theaters of operation. And of course, they have handled these cases which were made public. For instance, the people maybe that had issues with people at various checkpoints and all, particularly the Air Force, where people, some chaps that infringed on the rights of civilians around the Maiduguri airport. It was made public, the punishment was made public. But the same thing with the Army, the theater command of Operation Lafia Adole. There was a standing court-martial that handled all those cases. So those are the ways that we have handled those cases. But majority of it, I can say that they were just propaganda of the enemy against the successes that we record in the Northeast. Particularly each time that you see that we are recording successes, they will come up with one story or the other, particularly to discourage our strategic partners, then the populace, and then those are troops in the front. So that is what I can tell you, that the truth on the ground is that we have measures in place to check. Yes, we are not saints. In every 12 there must be a Judas, of course, and then we have been doling out the appropriate sanctions against the troops or officers and men that fall short of the expectation.
All right, thank you, General Enenche. Well, at this point, I think it's important to highlight the fact that we did reach out to authorities of the Nigerian police force to be part of this discussion, but we didn't get any kind of a response, because the police, of course, is the frontline security agency when it comes to many of the crime forms that we're talking about. Now, Colonel Dari, one of the things that has been identified, and which Dr. Akomu talked about earlier, is that the crimes, which ones do we want to talk about? There are various levels of crimes. The things we were dealing with 5 years ago are not those we're dealing with now. They were not the ones we were dealing with a year ago. Some have even pointed out that COVID has brought about some new forms of crime, because people are more contained in locations, and therefore they're more susceptible. But looking forward, and I'm saying that because of our time, the strategies to be put in place to address some of these things, would you go along with those who say strengthening of security agencies should be the priority?
Ladi, thank you very much for this question. For me, this is somehow dicey. It is neither here nor there, because like he said, security is everybody's business. Okay? You and I, we have our part to play in security. So it's not just for the federal government agencies, that is security agencies alone, or the military, okay? And I had all that Dr. Ekomu said, and which I quite agree. But one thing we must also look at here is that, you know, our demography, okay? When you look at, say, Ijoma mentioned 21 years ago. 21 years ago, look back, what was the population of this country? Mm-hmm. And it was a different kettle of fish. Today, who knows? Some people say we are 200 million, over 200 million. So we have fresh challenges. And even with technological advancement, so every day you have new challenges, you know. Now, talking about the present situation, I think that a lot has to be done, not only strengthening the forces, okay? Not only strengthening the forces, you can buy all you care, you can buy everything, all the latest gadgets, but if the psyche of that person to operate these gadgets is not tuned in line with what is expected, or the expectation, then it will amount to naught, okay? So why am I saying this? We have a myriad of problems in this country, and it cuts across. The leaders, they have their own part. The led, they have their own parts too. And right now, we are faced with a lot of security issues in this country. Is it the insurgent in the northeast that we want to talk about? The militancy in the Niger Delta? The kidnapping? Armed robbery? Is it the herdsmen and the crop farmers confrontation? So it's multifaceted and multidimensional. But right now, I think our military also, the way I see the military right now, it's on record. And I must really commend them that they are doing so much. But I think the military is somehow overwhelmed right now. And there's need, you know, for even the federal government to re-strategize, because what is on the front burner right now, the major crisis we have, is the issue of the Boko Haram. We have been at this for almost a decade now. You see? So there's an axiom in the military that you know your enemy. You have to study your enemy. You have to know your enemy's intention. You have to know your enemy's habits. Okay? So one expects that by now, our military too should kind of know these enemies so well. Granted, this warfare is not a conventional one. It is a guerrilla, more or less a guerrilla type of warfare. But notwithstanding, I think there's need for us to re-strategize. Now, away from that, the general security situation. What do we have right now? There are laws have been put in place, but there's need to give teeth to these laws. It's not a situation whereby somebody has gone to steal billions, and at the end of the day, he gets off the hook. He or she gets off the hook with a slap on the wrist, or due to some technical reasons. And then another person has stolen a motorbike and is sent to jail for 7 years. So why am I saying this? we are fighting corruption. There's so much corruption. And this is part of the reason why the crime rate is on the increase. Because...
Okay, Kanodari, I'll come back to you, but I know you've said quite a bit, but I want to come to you, Major General Enenche, specifically because this Boko Haram war we've been talking about goes beyond this political dispensation. It's been on. But specifically now, what sort of challenge are you having at the moment? I know we've been talking about funding, etc. Is it an equipment issue? Because each time we hear they've been decimated and they've lost their capacity to launch attacks, even now in the COVID era, we see that it is still on. What would you say is the principal challenge that the armed forces is facing at the moment prosecuting this particular war?
Good. The principal challenge we have in prosecuting this war, not only in the Northeast, it cuts across North, West, and North Central, is the issue of getting credible information from the populace. And that is a spillover effect. A lot of people didn't know that we saw a couple of days ago, this week, in Maiduguri, around Maiduguri, and in Katsina State, in the Borno State and Katsina State, where about 81 were killed and then 40 others. The remote reason for those actions was that you gave our positions away to the military, and they use other excuses to bounce on them. And that has been the major challenge. If we had the cooperation from the general public, particularly from those communities and those localities, where those terrorists, criminals, and bandits operate from in sleeper cells and hibernations, we would have long before now completed the complete degradation.
So what you're saying is that there's no
strategy was to dominate, to decimate, which we completed as far back as September 2016, and then to dominate the area. After domination, then to occupy. All of them have their legs. So the major challenge that has been, by the beginning of this year, it was a bit overcome. But that is, like I said, that is the outcome of what we saw. When they started volunteering information, you could see that the rate of success at both fronts increased rapidly. At a point, I had to come out from March 20th to begin to give the figures. And as the advances were going, the clearance operations were going both from the ground forces and the airstrikes. It was based on human intelligence, information. And that was our greatest challenge, as it were, cutting across all the zones. So I will say that now you cannot run away from that. We studied how it happened in other climes in the world. I particularly studied Pakistan. It took them 25 years. After about 12 years, when the people started volunteering information, within 2 years, they were done with what we are seeing now. So
sorry, Major General, sorry to cut in.
We believe that by the time we overcome this,
sorry
the
to have
people are not
to cut
becoming
in.
more
I'm just trying to find out from you now. So what you're saying is that right now, there is no hardware equipment challenge. There is no funding challenge. We are principally facing an information challenge.
No.
Is that what you're saying?
It's just information. I'm saying that, but because as a practitioner, I can say that with all due respect, vast in operations, you plan with what you have, what you are giving weight against your challenge. And I can say that in all modesty, what we have on ground, if not for the lack of information where they are particularly, can you imagine a situation whereby you just pass a place and before you come back, they plant an IED and people are there watching? Will you blame it on that you don't have equipment? Will you blame that you don't have the men? The answer is purely no. Because if you have the information that these people planted this in, you have a way of clearing that place. So the major challenge, the truth of the matter is that it is about this information, giving us information. We had a lot of collaborators, and now we are at the stage of mopping up those collaborators.
Okay, General Enenche, I'm told that
yes.
I'm told that run out of time, but I think we'll still be able to
go
around. No, that's fine. That's fine. We'll go around for a number of closing statements, starting again from Lagos here, and Dr. Ekomo, and then of course we'll take Mr. Adeshino, and then we'll end up with Colonel Dari. Dr. Ekomo.
Thank you, Ladi and Ms. Ijama, and my big brothers in Abuja. I think going back to the question you asked me at the beginning, do people feel more safe or less safe? What do I tell them? And I say it depends on where they are coming from, or where they live, or what their circumstances, and what specific threats we are looking at. So that's where it starts. You know, we have to look at the risk spectrum in our society, and then we need to do proper assessments of those risks, where they lie, and then before we can proffer meaningful solutions to those risks, and then start implementing them. You know, so it's not a one-size-fits-all kind of a thing we have here. And we have to be very smart about it. So I think what the Nigerian Senate did recently when they had this Senate committee on security challenges, it was very useful. They brought in a lot of stakeholders, took hearings or held hearings, and then issued a report. And I think, I don't know what came out of that report, but I think I gave them something in that particular process, you know, such that I thought that is something that we'll be able to address because that's what we are lacking really, risk map. So we need to be able to go out there and map those risks and then address them such that we can have a safer society. Without
At that point, Dr. Ekomo, let me put you on pause and go to Mr. Adeshino in our Abuja studios.
Yes, thank you. If you listen to the president most of the times when he talks about the three focal areas of the administration, the first one he talks about is securing the country. Then the next one usually is reviving the economy, and the third one is fighting corruption. On that first one, he keeps saying before you can efficiently manage a country or even a town or an organization, you have to secure it. So for this administration, security is number one, and it remains number one. Globally, you won't get to a time where you can sit back and you say everything is secure. You will continue to work on security. You will continue to be alert to security. So this administration will continue to make security of the country number one. Whether the challenge is insurgency, whether it's banditry, whether it's kidnapping, whether it's farmers admins clashes, whatever the challenge is, security will always be number one to the administration.
Let me give General Enenche a minute for your closing statement.
Yes, I want to appeal to the general public to take a look back from the first quarter of the year through to the second quarter and see the rate of successes we've recorded. Though it's modest, but I can say that compared to the last quarters, 2 quarters of last year, something happened very positively. And how did we achieve that? We have a very good level of cooperation from the populace, from the general public, particularly at the hotspots. So I'm appealing to them to continue to provide information to the security agencies, particularly the troops in the front line and those at the hotspots. And working together with them, we are going to achieve more than what we achieved. And before you know it, the graph will begin to drop, and we'll get to where we expect.
Thank you very much, General Enenche. Colonel Dari.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Ladi. My parting words is going to be in twofold. I'd like to talk about security generally. On general security here, I think a lot needs to be done. You find out that lately I was discussing with some friends, and somebody gave a hint of how, you know, some foreigners are managing our work permits or visas you know, residents' visas into the country. They have an office in Abuja. Foreigners, I don't think that is good for us, even security-wise. So I think that's something that the federal government needs to look into and stop, because they have all their people doing that. That's one. Then another thing is that as we speak, I think the governors, they need to wake up and take charge, you know, of the security of the states. I commend what is happening in the Southwest, just like the Southeast governors too are trying to rally themselves around, you know. So it has gotten to that stage. We need to do that. That's for general security. Now on the insurgent front, now you see, I want to advise that, like, you know, like the terrorists do. The terrorists, they thrive on propaganda, okay? They go, they use the media and all whatnot. Fine. We know that the armed forces, the Nigerian military, they've really tried. These guys are working, doing fantastic. But there's need for NHS office to release some of these clips. Let the public see these clips, okay? It will go a long way in forestalling and you know, some confidence in their work. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me thank our guests. As always, time is never our friend when we have these discussions. Dr. Ekomu, Colonel Dari in our Lagos studios, General Enenche, and Mr. Adeshino in our Abuja studios. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for being with us. We'll take a final break, and when we come back, we'll go to the last segment, which ties all of this together, and that will be the law. Please stay on with us.
All right, welcome back to the program as we celebrate Democracy Day. Although we're in the COVID-19 era, we've looked at different segments, the economy, we've looked at health, we've looked at our politics as well. And now, as Ladi said, we're looking at the law, the meat in the sandwich, technically, that binds all this together. Where would we be without it? And we're looking at it for the last 21 years of this democracy or so. Be part of the conversation as we asked you to be. And Ladi, I'm going to go to you now.
Indeed. A star-studded panel. I only hope that we get enough time to fix all the questions in. Starting from our Abuja studios, where we're being joined by the Minister of State for Labor. He's a lawyer, senior advocate of Nigeria, Festus Keyamo. Nice to see you, Mr. Keyamo. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
And in our Lagos studios here, we have first, in no particular order, Mr. Mohammed Balgore Jr., Senior Advocate of Nigeria. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And sitting beside him, we have Mr. Seni Adio, who is also a Senior Advocate of Nigeria. Thank you so much for being our guest this evening.
It's a pleasure.
And then you have, of course, the former Solicitor General of Lagos State, Director of Public Prosecutions at the time, Mr. Fola Athawari. Thank you so much for being with us.
Pleasure.
Let me start off with you in Abuja, Mr. Keyamo. COVID has brought about some innovation. I wouldn't say that innovation has been around for 21 years. It's been around for the last 4 or 5 months, which is the issue of virtual court proceedings. Many people have hailed this, but there are others who are saying, again, it's going to move justice away from those who do not quite have the means. Where do you stand on this?
Thank you very much. There are 2 issues involved here. The first one is the legal issue, whether the virtual hearings, they do satisfy the provisions of the law. And then the other one, of course, is the matter of convenience, how convenient it will be for people who are interested in proceedings, how convenient it will be for them to be part of those proceedings. But then the first one is that the only requirement, and one of the major requirements that we have regarding court hearings is that they should be done in public, except in certain trials where by leave of the court, certain witnesses should be heard in camera. So generally, the general principle is that trials must be held in public. Now, the provisions, to my mind, the provisions regarding the new rules regarding virtual hearings will satisfy that provision if, for instance, the link to those hearings are made public. You know what they do with the Zoom these days. They give you the number, the code to get into the hearings. And so if they are publicized in a way that members of the public can key in at any time from the comfort of their homes and watch the proceedings by Zoom, then it does meet that provision of the law. In other words, the public is allowed at any time through virtual means to join and observe court proceedings. So to my mind, the virtual hearings would not breach provisions of the law.
Let me follow up that question by asking a broader question now, which has to do with the issue of technology in the legal system and how that relates to the speed of justice dispensation. So many people have over the years talked about introducing technology, but somehow it hasn't gotten done. Given where we are now with all the rules that the health pandemic has brought about and so on, is this, in your view, more or less a compelling factor to introduce technology generally across the legal system?
Let me say first of all that I don't want to use the word that I'm happy that the pandemic happened, but I am happy that it is moving us faster than we should move, especially in the third world country like Nigeria. In many parts of the world, filing of pleadings, filing of papers in court, and so many things have been done, and are being done by technology. We depend so much on hard copies here. We must take hard copies to court. We must file hard copies. We must bring hard copies to court sittings. We must even submit, in many cases, our hard copies of law reports that we cite. Many times, the judges will tell you to leave your hard copies behind for them to write their rulings and their judgments. So there has been efforts in the past to move us forward faster than we were moving, so that we could use technology to drive court proceedings. But I'm happy that the pandemic is I'm not happy the pandemic came, but I'm happy that the pandemic has forced us to move faster than we were moving. And so I think it was high time, even before the pandemic, I think it was high time for us to do so many things technologically in courts. For instance, the filing of papers, there's no reason why you cannot file papers from the comfort of your offices. There are so many provisions by which we can pay online now. We pay our DSTV online, we pay so many bills online. So there's really no reason why we cannot pay court fees online from the comfort of our offices. Prepare your pleadings, file them online, and pay your fees online. So I am happy that we are moving faster than we should have moved, and I'm happy. I hope that we'll keep this momentum. Even if COVID goes tomorrow, I think we should keep this momentum going in terms of the shift from manual practice to technological practice.
Okay, Mr. Kayamo, I mean, technology and the law is just one aspect, but looking at the rule of law itself in the last 21 years, what I'd like to know is how you think we have fared in terms of that rule of law, just beyond that technology and how to speed up the process. You've been on both sides, and you know what I mean by asking you that. How have we fared in terms of the rule of law itself?
Well, it has been a mixed bag, the rule of law, in the sense that it is expected that in a third world country like ours, or an emerging democracy, more or less, we are yet to test many aspects of our laws and our democracy. So we have had to wait for the Supreme Court to interpret most of our laws, interprets many provisions for Electoral Act regarding human rights, regarding the right to vote, right to contest, right to various offices, for us to determine the slant, the correct slant of the law in many cases. So whether we have complied with the rule of law or not depends on the angle from which you are looking at it. For instance, there was a time when without the Supreme Court intervening, we saw 6 lawmakers removing the governor from office. And the bar was divided. Some said, no, well, it is 6 sitting, and then we only have to look at the required number from the minimum number that can sit. And some people say, no, we could only look at the numbers that can remove a governor from the whole house, the number of the whole house, until the Supreme Court interpreted it. So at that point, when the regime used 6 lawmakers to remove a governor, we all shouted the rule of law was being bastardized. Some other people say no, they were within the law. So in other words, the rule of law is an emerging issue. As the Supreme Court continues to interpret our laws, and as we go on, the laws and the correct slant and color of most of these provisions would become clearer and clearer as time goes on. But overall, we are happy that we have sustained democracy for 21 years. We are happy that the judiciary has kept democracy alive, because in all of this, in many cases, if left to only the two other branches of government, perhaps democracy would have collapsed long ago. But the judiciary has stood its grounds. The judiciary has restored democracy in many instances, has intervened decisively in many instances, and it has kept us going.
Thank you very much, Mr. Keyamo, for that. We want to thank you this evening for joining us on the program. Thank you so much for your time. Mr. Festus Keyamo, Minister of State Labor, joined us from our Abuja studios. Now, expanding the discussion, I'm going to put the same question to 3 of you. When people talk about the law, essentially they talk mostly about law and order and getting justice. Yes. That's the end of the process, when people get justice and they see themselves getting justice. Have we seen more of that on that democratic rule than we had previously? Is that a fair comment? Yes, that we saw more of that.
More of people
getting justice and being seen to get justice.
I think if we don't have records of actual cases where human rights claims were upheld, it's difficult to say. I think the picture is mixed. We've seen the courts try their best, and some level of resistance sometimes from the person who should assist in the compliance. But I think we shouldn't narrow ourselves, I think, in terms of speaking about the rule of law, to just obedience to court orders, etc. We should look at the whole of society and see whether there's been the necessary behavioral change whereby people comply more. There seems to be a battle now to sort of impose order, as if people have taken democracy to mean I can do what I like. I think it's important that beyond the judiciary, we should look at the other institutions responsible for order, such as the police, and then citizen awareness, whereby, you know, compliance, normal societies would have a majority compliance, and then the systems will be able to deal with the deviant few. But we seem to be moving towards, I mean, if you look at the state of the roads and the way people drive, the way people behave, you go to institutions, they don't follow the regulations, you understand. You might go to the website of, say, some particular licensing office, and they tell you these are the steps, and you get there and then they say, well, there are more steps. All of these, to me, I mean, when you see, it's not just, that's why I say it's not just obedience. I mean, if you travel abroad, you're not even thinking of the courts. You'll see order. So I think that the burden of governance going forward is that by their example, they can force the type of behavioral change. You were talking about, when you were interviewing the general, you spoke about army public relations. We know that invariably in 9 out of 10 cases, there's oppression, there's violence visited by, you know, the military people against civilians. And we're saying that democracy means that everybody beyond the judiciary, the leaders of the institutions that impact on daily order and a sense that there is indeed a rule of law are important players in this system. So I would say that the picture is mixed. That would be my
What would be your view?
Yes, well, I agree with Mr. Thawari, but I would also say that indeed there's been progress. I think that, for example, in terms of civil litigation, the way we practice in our courts now, in terms of front-loading pleadings to remove the element of surprise, so that parties, when you're going to court, you know what your opponent's case is about. I think that's progress. So more recently, I think at the Lagos High Court, we have the new civil procedure rules. I think it's 2019. It's an advancement from the 2004 civil procedure rules. So you have that. You have some level of transcription at the High Court. It's not in all the courtrooms yet. There's some progress. Mr. Kayamo mentioned e-filing. That's happening. Not at the level it ought to be happening. Maybe as a result of new practice directions that the CJ of Lagos State, Justice Alugba, issued about a week ago, maybe we're now getting to the level of actual virtual filings, because before you would still have to, they would scan the documents, but you still have to go physically to the registry to have it done. That's not really e-filing. So there's been progress. We have courts that are specialty courts, the commercial courts, but not just in Lagos. Various jurisdictions have commercial divisions. We have many of the courts now in different states have the mediation centers. For example, a lot of people are able to resolve their matters fairly expeditiously through that process. So there's been progress. But if I may just amplify on what Mr. Kayamo was saying, in terms of technology, for me, I don't think it's an issue to be debated. I think the law is very dynamic. We don't have a choice. We have to move with the times. And in many jurisdictions, and I don't know why we have to be following what other people do. Why can't we be pioneers and be the first to do something? So, for example, the U.S. Supreme Court has been having hearings remotely already. In other climes, proceedings are being held, both civil, criminal proceedings and judgments being rendered. Coming to our own continent here, there have been proceedings in particularly Kenya, for example, where judges are reading out tens or dozens of judgments in a day through virtual hearing.
But ours is a subject of litigation at the moment.
Well, apparently some states, some southwestern AGs have gone to the Supreme Court, but they've gone because they want clarity and certainty. They are for using technology. They also want the Supreme Court to make that pronouncement so that it's very clear to the other tiers of courts that, in fact, this is constitutional.
Mr. Belgore, how about at the administration of justice?
I wanted to. I'm sorry. I don't think we should, though, adopt the view or the misconception that virtual hearing is proposed for all hearings. That will not work, because first of all, that won't deal with the backlog of cases. And secondly, normally you use it for emergency hearings where you need a quick outcome, or where a witness is in another country and it was expensive, or bail hearings, administrative hearings. But I think the substantial number of cases within the system will still go on in the normal physical, but with the enhancement of the technological backup, the filing, the ability to access cases, etc., etc. I think that's where we should be looking at.
Mr. Belgore.
I was going to ask about, going to ask about the Administration of Criminal Justice Act.
Yes.
Quite a lot has been made about that, particularly about the issue of speed and the introduction of delays by one or both parties that do not serve the interest of the law. How has that worked out? Because people still talk about delays.
Well, thank you very much. You see, delay is a function of a number of things. One, it's a function of the lawyers, it's a function of the judges, and it's a function of the rules within which they operate. The Administration of Criminal Justice Act has attempted to cut the delays. But as Mr. Thawari said, you've got to change people's attitudes. If you don't change the attitude, if you have new laws, but people are still operating with the same attitude, you're not going to get much in terms of progress. Also, we have to bear in mind the fact that justice must not be rushed. In an attempt to cure delay, you might cause injustice. The Administration of Criminal Justice Act says things like, there are certain applications that when you raise them, the judge does not have to decide them. He waits till the end of the case. Now, what I'd interpret that to mean is that the judge has a discretion to wait until the end of the case, not that he must mandatorily wait till the end of the case. But unfortunately, you get some mechanical interpretation of this in which the judge just says, nope, read what the ACJA says. I'll give an example. You come to a court and says that court does not have jurisdiction. And I've heard argument that before the court has to decide it right away. But the Administration of Criminal Justice Act merely says the judge can listen to the argument and then decide at the end. Now if it turns out that it doesn't have jurisdiction, you've wasted the time of the court, you've wasted public resources, but more importantly, you've put somebody, and we must never lose sight of this, you've put somebody through the rigors of a trial, a criminal trial, when he should not have gone through a criminal trial. So we'll bear that in mind. But if I may just touch on something that my colleagues have said, and Festus Keyamo, without repeating what they've said. The rule of law is not optional. It's not a tool of convenience. You're talking about progress. And what is the rule of law in this instance? It is running the society in an orderly fashion based on the law. And what that means is that everybody is subject to the law. The highest person in government is just as subject to the law as your ordinary private citizen. So a situation whereby when it suits the powers that be, they obey court orders. When it doesn't suit them, they do not obey court orders. That, for me, is the biggest obstacle and the biggest drawback to the rule of law in the period that you
I understand we have to go back to Abuja, but just before we do, Mr. Warri, just to ask you quickly, with the way things are going now, there have been calls for special courts. We know
in relation to criminal justice?
No, now in relation to another issue.
Okay.
Just quickly now, we know there were calls for special courts when we talk about corruption.
Okay.
Now we're looking at rape, and this is an issue that affects so many people. Where are we on that? If the courts were doing what they ought to do, would we be looking for a special court for that?
I have never been a believer in special courts for special. Let all courts run efficiently, and then you have the divisions, and rape or any other criminal case will fit into the criminal division, be resourced properly, will not tolerate the disassembly that we tend to use, and will achieve the same results. What you do, set up special courts, that's creating more expense. Then oftentimes you take judges from the regular circuit, because you can't just appoint them overnight, and you bring them into the special courts and generally disrupt, in my view, the administration of justice. So I think it's better to have overall efficiency in the system that can deal with any matter, rather than shifting and adjusting, to deal with specific. Rape is a crime that's been with us for a long time. The internet, and there have been many convictions without special courts. But then I suppose it's a matter of policy, and that the objective will be that anybody involved will be punished adequately and within such a reasonable time as that the judgment will have an impact, because the judgment is supposed to act as a deterrent. But if you are extending a trial 3 years after the witness, everybody's forgotten, then it becomes a mere technical exercise. The purpose of a criminal conviction is principally to deter. Even you punish
somebody else was thinking about, or maybe thinking about
it. That listen, within 3 months you'll be in prison for life. That makes sense.
I need to ask the two, before we go to Abuja, I need to ask two of you the issue of personnel, because that's the other side of this that very often doesn't get addressed. A couple of days ago, there was the argument that the Supreme Court has 12 justices. It ought to have 21.
21, yes.
Okay? And 4 names had been submitted, working their way through the bureaucracy. The issue of personnel, how vital is it to the enhancement of the processes the three of you have described earlier, the issue of personnel?
Well, to answer the question, it's very vital to have a full complement on the Supreme Court. Equally vital, perhaps even more vital, is to have the right complement, if I may describe it as such. By that I mean that to have diversity in terms of what the personnel bring to the court, so that, for example, having members of the court who have been in academia, for example, having those who have spent a lot of time at the private bar, for example, that's happened in the past. So I'm certainly in favor of appointments from the bar. I'm also in favor of appointments from the academia. And then certainly with the 4 that are pending, the 4 honorable justices of the Court of Appeal that are pending, yes, I would advise that the government should promptly have them sworn in and then come to as close as possible. I'm not sure we've ever had a full complement before, but I think at least come as close as possible to having a full complement, but including people in academia and from the private bar.
Mr. Belgari, what do you think?
Well, aside from that, that's a very vital issue, but I think that's just a symptom. That's not really the cause. You've got to look at how the Supreme Court is structured today and what it does. The Supreme Court is the highest court in the land, but it takes appeals that originate from the very lowest courts. A landlord and tenant dispute over rent of 5,000 naira still gets to the Supreme Court. There's no reason why that should be the case. And as long
we're completely out of time. We're completely out of time. I believe that your point is well observed. We'll have just about 30 seconds to take the final word. I understand the Minister of State for Labor, Mr. Festus Keyamo, is still in our Abuja studios. Mr. Keyamo, you've listened to everything that's been said. 30 seconds, summary, please.
Let's take it from what the last speaker was saying. Very simple. If we want to hasten the dispensation of justice, we should make sure that we do adopt recorders for our judges. It is too antiquarian for judges to still be taking proceedings by longhand. That, I think, is the key that we unlock a lot of these delays in the administration of justice at the lower courts. At the Supreme Court, we need to decentralize the Supreme Court. We need to do that. If we don't do that, we're going to have backlog of cases for 10, 15 years waiting for the Supreme Court to be heard. Thank you.
All right, then it's at that point that we're going to leave it. Like every other thing and like every other segment today, time has not been our friend. So let's thank Mr. Athawari, Mr. Adio, Mr. Belgari, and of course, Mr. Keyamo in our Abuja studios. Thank you, gentlemen, for coming in. These discussions will continue endlessly on other platforms. But Ijoma, it's time to go.
That's indeed. Thanks a lot for joining us. It has been a nice one, hasn't it, Ladi?
Indeed.
Happy democracy
the problem has always been time. So I guess
what do you do when you have 4 essays?
I mean, you've got to take your time with it. Yeah. But it's time for us to go. We thank you so much for being with us right from the start as we took you through all the discussions today. Do have a happy Democracy Day. Enjoy.
Yeah, great. And bye.
Bye-bye.